Okay, so this new chapter, this is very uh, specific, very targeted at creating 360 based environments. And this is kind of a long chapter, so maybe we'll need to take a break a bit after a bit after 8:30 there in Macau. But let's see how fast I can go, because I'd like to explain things in some detail, at least most of them, not all of them, but most. So let's see this step by step. So again, we are trying to create 360 based environments. So mostly based on photographs, on 360 photographs. So the first thing to know is that there are actually more than one format for these pictures that we can then use to create environments where the picture kind of surrounds the user. There is, and this is the kind of pictures that we have already saw. There's this kind of picture, so it's called an equirectangular image. And this is one I took in my office here in Portugal, again with a 360 camera. And so you notice that this is exactly like the planisphere, like a map, like a globe, of the planet Earth. Um, when you kind of transform the globe into a plane, of course, you notice that on the top and bottom edges, it's kind of like the image is stretched because on the sphere, this bottom and top lines, they will actually be transformed to a single point. And so when the image is transformed into a plane, this is very, very stretched. So the image kind of look like this. And this is actually the type of image that we are going to use in A-Frame. But just to let you know, there is another alternative for these pictures, which is this one that I'm showing now, which is called usually called the cube map. And it's easy to see why. So it's like you have, it's like you assemble a cube with you have the 6 faces, and then you just assemble a cube, and the user is inside the cube. And so wherever it looks, you will see part of the picture. But this is harder to use in A-Frame, so we won't use. A-Frame has direct support for these accurate rectangular ones. So these are the ones that we are going to use. So now the next question is, how do we get these photos? We already kind of discussed this, but then I'm just going through the list again. So one way is to take a single photograph with a 360 camera. And this is a good way to get these pictures if you have access to one of these cameras. And they are actually very affordable now. They are kind of rather cheap, I would say, 360 cameras nowadays. And you have 2 available there at USJ. And if you want to take a picture, for example, of an environment which is hard to find through other means, like inside your house or a private location or a specific location there in Macau, which doesn't appear, for example, in Google Street View, this is a good solution. They usually, I won't be getting to much detail here, but just to help you, if you use one of those cameras that you have at USJ, for example, usually the way to use these cameras is that they require you to install an application on your smartphone. Well, not all of them, but most of them, they have also an associated smartphone app. And with the app, usually you can actually take the picture from a distance, so that you kind of set up the camera in a tripod in a given location, and then you move away from the view of the camera so that yourself, you don't appear in the picture, and then you use our smartphone to take the picture. The alternative is to set a timer on the camera and then just run away from it so that you don't appear on the picture. But with a smartphone, it's easier. And also, usually with these cameras, they kind of, depending on the camera that you are using, they kind of have their own format. So usually you have to transfer the pictures that you took with the camera to your computer, and then run them through a software that converts them to this format here. So this equirectangular image is not typically the direct output of the camera. Okay, so but this depends on the actual camera. But with the ones that you have at USJ, this is what happens. So the camera actually takes kind of two 180 pictures that you then have to combine in a single one. So you need to install also a small piece of software on your computer and then convert the images. Actually, there's an alternative for not installing software, which is searching on the internet for a conversion website, and then you just upload the pictures to the site and download the equirectangular ones that you can use in A-frame. But so just keep in mind, if you want to use one of these cameras, there are these small steps that you need to take to get the output that you want. Another alternative, and this is much harder, and you should only try this if you really like photography and if you kind of don't mind buying additional additional hardware for your setup. But these 360 cameras, most of them, they are not very high quality. So the quality of the picture that you will take with the cameras that you have at USJ, for example, it's not a very, very high quality picture. So the resolution is not that big. If you really want a very, very high quality picture, then you can, for example, use a professional camera, and you need to set up the camera. You need to, you also need to buy a special attachment for the camera that allows the camera to pivot around around the sensor, and usually tripods, they don't allow this. So you need a special attachment to put your camera in, and you need to kind of calibrate it to make sure that the camera is able to rotate around the sensor that takes the picture, so that then you can take several pictures around you and they are all from the exact same point in space. And this is important. And then you can you take multiple photos and then you stitch them together. Use a special software to compose the final 360 photo. But this will give you a very large resolution picture. I won't show you this, but there's a link here for a YouTube video that shows kind of how the process goes, how you can take these 360 photos with this kind of more professional cameras, if you are interested. But this again, oops, this is kind of much more effort to do. We also already saw another way of taking a 360 photo, in this case from a virtual environment, of course, not from a real location, which is in A-frame. So you just press that key combination and you get a 360 image, not a photograph, but an image of the environment itself. You can also, in depending on the situation, on the purpose of your environment, there are lots of sites, well, not lots, but there are many sites that already have 360 photos ready for you to download. So you can just look, and I think I have left at least one site. No, I haven't. But I will update this. I thought I had left a website here in the references, but I will update and leave one or two references, websites where you can just browse through pictures and just download. And then you can use them directly. So these are already in the accurate rectangular format that you need. Another interesting way is to use Google Street View. Google Street View, so you know the service, so Google has photos from many locations on the world, including Macau, most of Macau, I think. So there's actually a software that you can use to download a 360 photo from Google Street View. And this will actually, of course, you know that Google Street View has this kind of artifacts, visual artifacts that are showing here, for example, in this picture. So things are not perfectly aligned, but still it can give you kind of nice 360 photos without much effort. And this is the main advantage. So very low effort to get one of these pictures. I'll just show you kind of the process, not the whole process here, because the process is actually documented here in this video. So then you can go through this step by step, but I'll just explain kind of the main idea. So you need to use a specific website, and you need to download a specific software, and this is available through this link. So I'm going to open here. Let me just close these additional tabs. So this is the site where you can download the software for Windows and Mac. And then you just basically you need to go to Google Maps, and here you just need to find the place that you want to get the 360 photo. Of course, this is in Portugal, but you just need to click somewhere, enter the Street View, and so let's say you want this picture in Street View. Sorry, in as a 360 photo to use in your own environment. So you just need to do to select kind of this location, and then there's actually I think this is now simpler. In the video, where's URL? Oh, okay. So now this is simpler. In the video, I was using an earlier version of this software, where you first needed to go to a website and paste this address, and that website would give you an ID for that panorama, and then you would paste the ID in the software. And the software, I think I can show it here. Street View download. I'm just opening the software that I have installed in my computer, just to show you how it looks like, but I think it's now a bit different. So this is, yeah, so I see here an update. I haven't used this for a few months. So there's an update here that I'm not going to to install right now. Yeah, so now there are quite a few different options. So I think it's easier now to download even. The last time I used, you need to also use another website that was kind of part of this one, where you would first copy the Street View location, so this URL, and then in the software you would paste here the ID of the panorama, and then you just need to kind of select the resolution that you want. And you see, and this you need to be a bit careful about this, you see that you have many different resolutions, but the first ones, they result in very large images. So you probably don't want this much resolution, because this will make your environment load very slowly. So you kind of need to probably download uh, 2 or 3 resolutions, and then look at the file sizes and try to make sure that you don't use a very large file. So I would say that perhaps this middle one is probably kind of the highest resolution that you should try to aim at. Above this, it will make your environment very slow to load. And then you just click here, this button, download panorama, and it will download the equirectangular image from that Google Street View location that you can then upload to your Glitch project. So let me go back here. So you'll probably, if you look at the video, again, you will probably now in the video see a process that is a bit more complicated than I think now you can do with a newer version of the software. So you need to adjust these steps. But again, if you have any problem, let me know, and I can help you downloading the locations that you want. So this is kind of the last option here, and I think that the first and last options are very good options, because they don't represent that much effort, and they allow you to kind of choose specifically what location you will get. And by the way, Google Street View, I'm not sure if all of you are aware of this, but Google Street View now also has indoor locations. So it's not just locations on the street. There are many places, I'm not sure about Macau, honestly, but there are many locations already where you can actually kind of use Street View to, for example, go inside the museum, or another cultural heritage site. So it's not just streets anymore. But you would need to kind of find those locations on a map. Um, they are usually, when you enter, I'm not sure, because these things, they change a lot. But usually when you enter Google Street View, let me see if it still behaves the same way. When you enter a location in Street View, um, oh, no, that's not what I wanted. Sorry. Let me try again. Okay. When you enter a location in Street View, then there's a small map that appears. And this will actually, here there is not, but when there are these indoor locations or other 360 photos that Street View has, they will appear here in this small map as dots. I'm not sure if I can show you this. Let me see if I can explore one location here in Portugal that has this. Let me see if I can find, so that then you can try searching there also in Macau um, to see if an interesting place for you also exists there in Macau. So I think there is a place here in Portugal that has this, which is um, a Roman ruins. So let me see if I can demonstrate this. may not work, okay, because things change very quickly in Google Maps nowadays. Let me try. So I'm going to enter here in Google, and actually this is a bit different, but you see here that there are these dots. And this, I don't think this is for the ruins, but let me see. Oh, because I'm in the wrong location. I'm not in the ruins that I wanted, but this is the same thing. So I'm going to click there. So in one of those dots, and you see that this is an indoor location. In this case, it's a store, but these indoor locations also exist in museums. And so you can also kind of take this through that Google Street View downloader, and then you have these 360 indoor photos for museums and other heritage sites. So in this case, it's for a store, so it's not very interesting in this case, but so the process is the same. Because I was here, I was off. I wanted to be in a different location. Where is it? Oh yeah, it's here. I was in the wrong place. So here it's the ruins, Roman ruins, and you see here also the 360 photos for that. And so again, you can do the same thing. You can download these photos using the Street View downloader. So it might be a good alternative. Okay, so enough about Street View. Just to kind of finish this photo taking part, if you take a photo with a 360 camera, or even if you take it with one of those more professional cameras with all the photos that you then stitch together, there's usually a problem that occurs in the final image, which is the tripod. So the tripod will appear in the image itself. Because the camera is 360, it will take a picture all around it, and the tripod is there. And usually you don't want the tripod to appear because it's kind of a strange object there. So if users look down, they will see kind of one or two legs of the tripod, and it's not very nice looking. But what you can do is just edit the photo in Photoshop, for example, and you can try to erase the tripod. So you saw that a 360 photo is just kind of a normal photo, stretched sphere, but so it's a photo, and you can edit in Photoshop. And here is a video that demonstrates that. The video is not mine, but it demonstrates what you can do. In many situations, you probably already saw if you experienced one of those 360 virtual tours, is that people just kind of, instead of erasing the tripod, they just insert a logo for the location, so that when users look down, they see a logo of your brand instead of seeing the tripod. So that's also a possibility. And so the last step we already saw, so I'm going to kind of go very fast through this. Is just you need to upload your pictures into the assets and then just use them as a texture for the sky. Okay. And again, we already talked about the sky. It's just a very, very large sphere that is all around the user. So I'm going to skip this. This is just an alternative. So we already saw this, a sky. You can also kind of create a sky with just a typical sphere. So it's just a very, very large sphere. So 1 kilometer of diameter. And just to make sure that you can see the sphere from the inside, so that you can texture the inside and not the outside, because the user will be inside the sphere. Now there's this example here. I'm going to show it first. Let me close these tabs now. This shows so what it looks. Again, this is one of your classrooms. with a photo taken with one of the cameras that you have there at USJ. Notice here, so this is where the tripod was, and you notice there's a kind of strange looking thing there. So you can just erase this or try to put a logo here on top of that. But this example demonstrates another thing, is that you can combine a photograph with 3D models. And in this case, the model is just a very simple thing. It's a box. And you can try to align things so that the box appears to be on top of that table. Of course, this is an illusion. So the box was not there when I took the photo. And I just tried to rotate the box and position it at a distance from the user that kind of looks like there's a box that sits on top of the table. But this is an illusion. So because the box, there is no object that represents the table. The table is actually very far away in the sky, as a texture in the sky. But it kind of looks like that. So the problem is, how can we align things? How can you put a box inside our environment and then try to align it to make it look like the box is sitting on top of the table? This is where another A-frame tool comes into comes into use and is very useful, actually, which is this visual inspector. So the visual inspector, I'm going to show it in a minute. I'm just going to describe it. Is something that you can call, you can open when you are looking at an environment in your browser. You can open this inspector, and it will allow you to inspect in detail each object, and it will also allow you to adjust things. So it will allow you to adjust the positioning, the rotation, the scaling of objects. Now, this inspector is not very, it's not a completely friendly tool to use. And so I'll try to demonstrate some of the things, some of the most difficult things to do with it. So let me first open the inspector here in this example. So to open the inspector, you need to click, sorry, let me go back here. You need to click on a key combination also on your keyboard. So in this case, it's simpler. It's Control plus Alt plus I. So Control Alt I. And you need to click this when you have an environment open. So I'm going to click Control Alt I, and you see that something new appears. And now there are a few things that you can do here. So you can just click with the left mouse button and drag around to look at a different perspective. And here on the left, you see the scene outline. So you can click on the various objects that the scene has. And so I'm going through these objects. So there's a box. So this is the box that I placed there, which looks like it's sitting on top of the table from the user's perspective. There's also a cylinder, which is actually not visible to the user, or at least it wasn't visible to the user in that perspective that I showed, but it's sitting there. Actually, let me go back to the scene. So the cylinder was visible. I just didn't draw attention to it. So it is there on the scene, but when you enter, you can't see it. You have to rotate a bit. And then going back to the inspector, there's a sphere. And the sphere is actually because there is no sky, so this environment is modeled with a very large sphere. So the sphere is actually what has the 360 photo as a texture, so it's the alternative to the sky. And then we have the camera, and again, the camera represents the user's eyes. And I'll get back to this later. And we also have these entities here, which we will talk a bit later on, I think at the end of the week, which are lights. Okay, so I won't go through this right now. So let me just reload. I'm going to reload because I made some changes in the inspector. And so I'm going to demonstrate how you can try to align this cylinder, which is currently it's kind of looks like it's on the floor, although it doesn't seem to be very well aligned with the floor. Let's try to make it look like it's sitting on one of these other tables. Okay, so I'm going to demonstrate that. So I'm kind of moving through this chapter. By the way, if you, I'm going to do the demonstration right now, but if you don't get everything, that's okay. So this chapter kind of has a few other animations that show, and a video that show how you can do this kind of alignment. Okay, so I'm just kind of going to summarize all these sections in a demonstration. So we want to align this object, this cylinder, with one of the other tables, or this one, so it's indifferent. So to make this easier, we will open the inspector. So Control Alt I. And now we need to find the cylinder, but that's easy. So the cylinder is, we can just select it in the outline. And then we can just rotate our view to look at it. So I'm just clicking and dragging. And after we click a 3D object here on the left, you notice that the object is kind of selected and there are a few arrows. These arrows, they allow us to move the object. So I'm going to click an arrow and drag it, and this allows us to move the object in the 3 axes. So I'm going to move it a bit here to the right or left, so we can move and to the top. Just click and drag the corresponding arrow. And I can also click and drag that red one to make it closer or further away. And we can also rotate by selecting this top button here. So at the top here where I have my mouse now, there are 3 buttons. The first one is for us to move the objects. The second one is for us to rotate. And notice how the selection of the object changes. So now we have these kind of circles around the object. These allow us to rotate the object when you click and drag one of those circles. And the other one, the other button on the top, is for scaling. So again, we get kind of 3 axes, and we can stretch on one of those axes. So this is scaling on the X axis, for example. Okay, so we have these kind of tools to manipulate our object. Notice this is one of the difficulties of using this inspector, that sometimes it loses your selection, so you need to be careful. You need to keep selecting the proper object. Okay, so now we know how to move and stretch and rotate. Let's try to put the object on top of a table. So I'm going to first get a sense of where the tables are. So maybe I will try putting the object on top of this one. So I'm going to try to move the object first. This is very rough for now. Just trying to put it more or less on top of the table. But now here's the other difficulty. This perspective that we have right now, this is not the user's perspective. Let me show you. We can go back to the preview of our scene, so we can kind of exit the visual inspector by clicking this button on the top left, back to scene. And I'm going to rotate, and so the object is on top of the table, but it's not exactly on the same position that I left here. So notice that the perspective that I have here is not exactly the same perspective that the users have when they are previewing the scene. And so this is I think the most difficult thing to do in this case. So the perspective of the user is represented by the camera. So we need to select the camera, and we need to move closer to it. And one thing we can do is, well, you can do this in slightly different ways. One way is to select the camera and then press the F button. The F is for focus. It will focus on the object that you have selected. So here, for example. So now I'm looking straight through the camera, but I'm still a bit behind the camera itself. So we need to move a bit forward. And the camera is a bit strange. Let me try to show this in a different perspective. So the camera is kind of this object here. I'm moving very far away from it so that I can show you. When you select the camera, so it kind of shows a number of different lines. There are these 4 yellow lines here. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And this kind of represent the angle of the camera lens. And then there are a few additional, this kind of diamond shape object. So it just represents a handle for the camera. But we need to kind of move past it. So let me focus on the camera. And we need to try to align our perspective inside the inspector with the exact center point of the camera. So we kind of need to move forward. And to move forward, I'm just rotating my mouse wheel. So I'm kind of zooming in on the camera, and you see here the center of the camera and the 4 lines that are yellow outside of this rectangular area, and I need to keep to get closer to that point just until it disappears from the view. So I'm not sure if it's easy to see here through Zoom, so you probably really need to try this for yourselves. But there's a given point when you zoom in, the center disappears. So this is where you are kind of very close to that center point of the camera. And now that you are there, you can try rotating the camera or your views. You can just click and drag the mouse and point the camera to where you want it, so to the table. And now that we have this perspective, this is much closer to the perspective that a user will have inside your environment. And so now we can select the cylinder and try to adjust its position on top of the table and its orientation to kind of align it with the table. And this is now kind of a subjective step. So you have to try to visually align things to make it look like there's a cylinder on top of the table. And you just need to make sure that it kind of looks okay to you. Okay, so let's imagine this is okay. So you have to kind of try to align the perspective that you have about the table with the perspective that you have for in this case, for this cylinder. And now if we go back to the scene, so this should be a similar perspective to the one that we had before. And now what is the final step? You notice here on the right, when we have an object selected, we see values for the position, rotation, and scale. And now we need to copy this back to our source code. Okay, because the changes that we do inside the inspector, they are not saved in our file. So we need to go back and we need to copy these values to the position, rotation, and scale of that object. So to do that, I'm going to make a copy of this example. Going back here, I'm opening the source, and I'm going to open one of my glitch projects, and I'm just going to create a new file. So I'm going to reproduce to go through those steps that we have already seen several times. So I'm going to create a file here inside the examples, and I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it 360.html. I'm going to paste the source code. And now I'm going, without making any further changes here in the inspector, I'm just going to add these values to the position, rotation, and scale of the cylinder. So the cylinder already has this attribute set. So I'm just going to change the values. So one way to do this without having to manually enter those values, although you can do that, is just to click this button here, and this will kind of copy everything about the cylinder to the clipboard, and then you can just temporarily paste it here right next the original one. And then I'm just going to copy these three attributes. I'm not going to replace the whole primitive. So I just copied this, the position, rotation, and scale. I'm going to, I'm going to copy and paste on my original one. And now I can delete this the second that I have just pasted from the Visual Inspector. Okay, so now we have kind of saved those final values, and we can preview this and see if it looks okay. So it's easy to make mistakes, so don't worry if things don't look okay in the first attempt. So now we have the white box that we did not change, and we have our cylinder also on top of that table. So this is how we can align 3D objects, 3D primitives that we add to a frame with a given 360 photo. So it's kind of hard work, you know, at least to get enough experience to do this alignment. But after you do get that experience, it becomes easier. And again, so this whole process is kind of described here also on this chapter, on this section. So don't worry if you missed something. You can just, again, look at this video and it kind of demonstrates the various steps. And again, this is important. You really need a bit of patience, you know. It's not easy to get this right the first time. You need to really learn how to use that visual inspector. Okay, so let me just check my clock and how much. Okay, we still have a few sections to cover. But maybe because I don't want, I want to make a break. Otherwise, I know it's a bit painful also for you. So maybe we can take a break right now for dinner, and when we come back, I will go through the rest of this chapter. So I know this is a bit more dense. It's a longer chapter, and so you will have less time today to work on exercises. But I think this is important so that you can start working on your project for the first delivery. So I'll try to finish this after the break. Is that okay? Okay, so let's take a 30 minutes break so we can come back just a bit before so 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Portugal, which should be, I think, a bit before 9 there in Macau. Okay, see you
Yes.
in half an hour.
Okay, thank you.
So let's continue. And this kind of second part of this chapter, um, it will kind of try to put together a number of different things that we have already seen, but in this case, trying to use several aspects that we have already talked about in A-Frame into a larger and kind of more complex example. Uh, so let's start by seeing how we can create what I call here information panels. So it's usual in this kind of 360 experience, in these tours, for us to be able, for users to be able to kind of look at something and get more information about it. So imagine you are trying to create kind of a virtual tour or of a museum or an art exhibition, and you want the users to be able to look at or click on something and get information about the artist or about that the artifacts that they are seeing. So let's see how we can create that kind of things. And to do that, we will try to combine several elements. So the panel itself, it will look a bit like this. So it has a white background, and this is actually an image. So this background is an image. So it's not easy to do this white background in A-Frame without using an image, because we want uh, these rounded corners, for example, and also we want this pointy thing at the bottom, so that we can use the panels to kind of to show that they are attached to an object in our 360 photo. So we will use a background image. Then we will use a line of text for the title, a picture to kind of illustrate the content, and additional text for describing in a bit more depth. So the artifact or the piece, the painting, for example, that the user would be seeing. Now, how can we create something like this? Well, there are many possible ways to create this. So I'm just going to show you mine, okay? But understand that this is not the only way to structure that kind of information. The approach that I'm using here is to try to create these panels kind of as independent objects that are easy to place afterwards in the 360 scene. And so to do that, we are going to take advantage of nesting, of placing items, placing objects inside one another, so that we have an outer object that represents the main, the panel itself, and so that it's easy to move around. So what I'm doing here is, and this is kind of a long snippet of code. What I'm doing is using a generic entity to represent the information panel. And I'm also using, to make it clear, to make it easy to read in the text and understand that this entity represents the information panel, I'm using that class attribute that we saw earlier on when we talked about HTML. And I'm going to show you in a minute one of the possible uses for this. So we need to remember that in one single 360 scene or environment, we will want to have possibly many of these information panels. So we cannot use the ID attribute in this case because we will need many of the same kind, and so IDs don't work that way. So each one would need to have its specific ID, its specific proper name, and so the class attribute does not have this restriction. So we can create several entities or several elements that have the same value for the class attribute. And so this kind of allows us to group together or assign a specific meaning to that element. So every time we see info panel associated with this class attribute, we know that all these items inside this entity, they are part of an information panel. Okay, so this, for now, this is kind of mostly for us, for us humans, programmers, than for the computer. So this is mostly information for us. Also, and I'm going to show you right away. It's probably easier. Let me just close a few tabs. Oh, sorry. Let me open the example. So this is the example, and in this case, we have only one information panel. And I'm going to open up the inspector. So Control Alt I, and this is one of the uses for that class attribute, is that it makes it a bit easier to identify. Let me try to enlarge this. So here, when you open the inspector on the left side, we have what we call the scene outline, the structure of the scene. And the values that we put on that class attribute, they show up here. So it makes it easier for us to identify a given object. So for example, if I want to move that information panel, I can just kind of quickly look into this list and locate the object that has the info panel. And so it makes it easier to identify and then to move things around, because the name appears in this inspector window, in this visual inspector. Okay. So this is one of the uses for this class attribute, to make it easier to identify in the visual inspector. And so everything that is part of this panel is actually inside this entity. And so what we have here, we have first the background, and this is an image. I'll show you in a minute the complete source code, but this is simply an image which is going to fetch a white image that has kind of this shape. So this is basically a PNG image with transparency, and I'll try to show that in a minute. And then we define the height and the width of this image. And in this case, I'm saying that the height and width is simply 1 meter by 1 meter. So it's a large panel that appears in front of the user. And then we have texts, and we already saw most of this. So we just need to be careful to make sure that we position the text. And again, remember, just to kind of recapitulate, to remind you. So all these elements, all these objects, because they are inside this entity, they are positioned relative to this entity itself. Okay, so the center of this entity is 0, 0, 0 for these elements, for these objects here. So they are placed in relation relative to the outer element. And so this image, for example, you notice we don't have the position attribute defined. And so this means that the image will be placed at 0, 0, 0, because that's the default, and 0, 0, 0 is the center of this entity. Okay? So this text, we need to make sure that in terms of Z index, that it is a bit closer to the user than the background image. Otherwise, they would kind of be at the same distance, and so the text would be kind of inside the background itself. So it can't be, otherwise it won't be readable. So we give a very, very small z, just to make it a bit closer to the user. And then we also position on the X and Y, just to kind of give it this exact position here. So kind of a small border from the edge of the picture and roughly in the middle of in the vertical middle of the picture. But these values were kind of manually adjusted. And so the rest, most of the rest we already saw. So to say that these are attributes to control kind of the disposition of the text. Then we have another. Oh, sorry. This is for the. Apologize. This text is for the title, so it's not. It's at the top of the image. It's not in the middle of the image. So the Y is very small. The Y index it's just to position very near the edges, the top left edges of the picture. Then we have the image, and this is the content image. So this one. So again, an image that is placed a bit closer to the user than the background image, and of course it's simply textured with that picture, which is something that I took from the former FCI school. And then another piece of text, which is, now this one is the main description, which here I just, I'm not showing the whole text in this snippet of code, but in the source code, in the complete source code, it is there. And again, we just position this to make sure that it's a bit to the right, so there's a small gap, small border, and roughly in the middle of the background picture in terms of vertical position. And so what this kind of does is position everything in relation to that outer object, so that now, as you saw here, it's easy to move the whole thing around. So I don't need to worry about moving the title, the image, and the description text, because they are all together. They are all tied up to that outer entity. So if I move the outer entity, they all move around with me. So this makes it a lot easier to position this information panel. Um, another detail here is this look at attribute. Now, this is a new attribute. I haven't talked about this. I'm going to show you here in context. So it's assigned to the outer A entity. And this represents an external component. So remember that we talked about external components when we talked about environments and particle systems. This is also an external component. And what this component does is that it automatically rotates the objects so that they are facing another given object. So it's kind of like you have something that is constantly facing you. So it's constantly looking at you. And so this is what it does. I'm just saying here, with this look at equals camera, I'm telling it to make this information panel continuously face the camera, and the camera is the user. Okay, and this is just to make it easier for us to position the information panel, because this way we don't need to worry about the rotation of the panel. We know that it will always be facing the user. So if I look around, it will follow kind of where I am. So it will be looking straight at kind of the center of the 360 photo, which is where the user is. So this is just kind of a shortcut so that we don't need to align the rotation of the object. And to use this, so we just write it like this. And to use this, we need to insert an additional script at the top of our file. And I'm going to show you the complete source code so that you have an idea of what is needed. So we have our A-frame, we have the look at component. There's another component that I'm not using yet, but I'm going to talk about it right next in a minute. And so we have our assets, so the various images, and I'm going to show you here the background, for example, just so that you see how it looks. I hope to be able to demonstrate here. Yeah, so it's not very easy to see, but so you see that there's a white area with those rounded corners, and it may not be easy to see, but this grayer area, this actually represents transparent part of the image. So you can create these images in Photoshop or any other image editing software. Just need to make sure that a part of the image is transparent, so that when you use it in A-frame, it shows through that transparent areas. Otherwise, the images would always be kind of rectangular, but with transparency, they don't need to be. Then we have that FCI image, which is just the image used for the content of the information panel. Again, this was just a random picture that I took from the site. And then we have the 360 photo, so the picture for the sky, so the classroom picture. So we have our sky with the 360 photo, and then our information panel. And of course, you see here the description is a very long line of text. Um, and in this case, so this case, the environment is rather simple. We just have a single information panel, but you would probably in a typical 360 scene you would probably have many of these. Um, and so you see that our source code kind of starts to become a bit larger, but that's okay, and there's really no way around it. So we need all our content to be inside this file. Um, another thing that we are using, just again to remind you, because this is a 360 environment, so we do not want our users to be able to move around. Otherwise, they would get to a wrong perspective. And actually, I can try demonstrating that to you right now. And so we explicitly add the camera with the cursor inside, and also we disable moving around. So we have this WASD controls enabled equals false, so that users cannot move around the environment. Actually, I'll show you, because this is something that happens often. I will show you what happens if you allow users to move around. So let's, I'm going to copy this code and maybe reuse this file that I created earlier. Okay, so I'm going to just replace this code, and I'm going to remove this attribute from the camera, and I'm going to reload. So now we have our information panel, and now users can move around. And so I can do this. I'm moving around, I'm pressing the forward and back keys. So I'm going back and I'm going forward. And notice that the background doesn't seem to change, but now you see that the information panel is not on the correct location. Actually, what is happening is that the user is moving relative towards both the information panel and the background image and the 360 photo. But the 360 photo, because it's on the sky and the sky is very, very far away, it doesn't seem to move. But that's just because it's very, very far away. Because the user is actually moving in relation also to the 360 photo. But so you see that things break. So if you allow users to move, you are moving, the user is not on the correct perspective now. So this cannot, in 360 photos, you should not allow users to move. And so we need to get that WASD controls enabled equals false back to prevent users from moving. So with that attribute, even if I try, I'm now clicking on the forward, back, left and right keys, and I cannot move. So I can just look around, but I cannot move. So this is kind of a small thing, small aspect, small detail, but it's important to have it there. Otherwise, users may break your scene by moving around. Okay, so let's see another issue and the way to solve it. So most of the times if you imagine, for example, a virtual tour to a museum or an art gallery, you probably have, so, and if you imagine it's, so the museum, let's stick with the museum example. Imagine it's a physical museum that you want to provide users with the ability to experience also virtually. Then you probably, what you did was you took a number of 360 photos, for example, on the center of each room in the museum. And so you have now a number of 360 photos, and you want each photo to kind of correspond to its own environment, to its own scene, and then allow users to jump from one scene to the other, from one 360 photo to the other. Now, to do that, you could already do that. So we already saw how to add portals. So you could create for each 360 photo, you could create one HTML file and just add the elements to that scene, and then create a portal to allow users to move from one file to the other, from one scene to the other. What is the problem with that? Well, if users are kind of experiencing the environment through a desktop, like we are currently, it's not a big deal. So it's not, you are used to clicking and waiting a few seconds for the web page to load. But if the user is experiencing your scene through, imagine, a smartphone inserted in a virtual reality enclosure, or through a proper virtual reality device, then it kind of breaks the experience. So when users go through a portal, the browser takes a few seconds to download everything and to show. And so there will be kind of a small period of time where the user is kind of seeing everything blank. So he was in a room and he went through a portal, and during a few seconds, all he sees is a blank picture. And that's not very, it's not very nice. So it kind of breaks the experience, kind of breaks the feeling of presence, of you being kind of really inside that museum, for example. And so what is the alternative? Well, the alternative is to have multiple photos in a single scene. And so that you have a single HTML file, so that the browser loads everything at the beginning. Let's see how we can do this, how we can transform our portals so that they take us not to a different HTML file, but to a different part of the same scene, to a different position on the same scene. So what we will do, and I'll try to kind of show this step by step. The first thing that we need is to place all the pictures on a single file. So to have all the skies on a single file. This is kind of, may sound a bit strange. So to have a single scene with multiple skies, but it works. So you can do that. And to make things a bit more structured, because now we have kind of several scenes inside a single file, I again am using external outer entities to represent those various scenes, so that things are a bit better structured and manageable in our HTML file. So what I'm creating is an external entity, an outer entity, and I'm saying this is the classroom scene. I'm giving it an ID. In this case, I can use IDs because kind of scenes will have their own proper names. So I'm saying this is the classroom scene, and the position of that scene in my overall environment is 0, 0, 0. And this is just kind of arbitrary position. We could position our internal scenes, if you will, anywhere, okay? And then I'm inserting another scene, which I'm calling outside, because actually this corresponds to 360 pictures that I took there at USJ. So one of them is the inside of the classroom, and the other two are on the outside corridors. And I'm positioning this at X equals 10,000. And here I have again the sky with a proper photo, 360 photo of the outside part, and then I have another, a third scene, also on the outside, on the X position 20,000. Why do we need? We just need to be a bit careful about this positioning to make sure that these skies, which remember they are very, very large spheres, they don't intercept each other. So we need to position them very far away from each other. So let me first, let me try to show you how this looks kind of from the outside. So I'm going to load the scene. I'm going to close these ones, which are not necessary. And I'm going to open the inspector, and I'm going to try to show you how it looks. So again, this is the inspector, and if you look at the scene outline, you see my main three kind of internal scenes. So we have the classroom, the outside one, outside two, and we start on the classroom scene. And I'm going to here on the Visual Inspector, I'm going to zoom out. So I'm just kind of rotating my mouse wheel. So I'm zooming out. And if I zoom out enough, oops, sorry. I have to reload because I messed up. I clicked somewhere where I shouldn't. So I'm going to do this again. I'm going to zoom out so that you kind of get the feeling of how this environment is actually structured. So what you have now, we see kind of three spheres. These are actually the skies that are they are far away from each other so that they don't overlap. So I'm going to show you here the top view so that you can verify that they don't overlap. We need to kind of zoom out very much. You really need to keep scrolling your mouse wheel a lot because you need to get very far away from the spheres. But I'm just going to do this once. Okay, so now you see that I have the first sphere, the first sky is centered on the 0, 0, 0. And then I have positioned another one to the right and the third one even more to the right. And you see that they don't overlap. They almost touch each other, but they don't overlap, and that's important. So if you see here, let's see the positions. Actually, in this source code, they are not positioned on 10,000. The second scene is just 1,000 because we don't need to position them that far away because the diameter of the sky is just 1 kilometer. So they just need to be 1 kilometer apart. So the second scene is 1 kilometer to the right, and the third scene is 2 kilometers to the right. They are almost touching, but they don't touch at the edges of each other. So this is how our scene actually looks like. So three very large spheres, three very large skies. So how do we now allow users to jump from one position to the other? Because now what we need to do is we need to allow user, which starts here, the camera will start at 0, 0, 0, so inside the first environment. We need to allow the user to jump to the position of the second scene. So to the here 10,000 in the actual code to 1,000, 0. So how can we do this? Well, to do this, we actually need a new external component that will allow us to create these internal addresses. And the component is called WebCentric. And so we need to add another script, which is this one, to the top of our file. And then to our scene, and this component should be added to the scene. You just write WebCentric. So you are just adding this component to the whole scene. And what this component will allow you to do is to create special URLs, that special addresses, so that when the user jumps through a portal, you will not get outside of your HTML. It will still be inside the same scene, but on a different position. So we just need to create URLs that look like this. So slash camera pos of this is short for camera position equals, and then 3 values for the X, Y, and Z position that you want the user to jump to. So with this, let me go back here. And for now, if you look around, so we don't have just yet, we don't have a portal, but we can already test this. So let's try to manually jump to another location. So what I'm going to do is to kind of manually create the URL, and then I just need to append that to the end of the complete URL. So I just append hashtag or hash symbol camera pos equals and a given position. And I'm going to put here 1000 comma 0 0 comma 0. So I'm going to jump to position 1000 0 0. And if I enter, then I'm now at the second scene, the outside scene that we could not see earlier. And if I try jumping to the third scene, I can just put here 2000. And now I'm on the third scene. Okay, so now we have a way to create URLs that allow the user to jump inside a single HTML file, which is nice. So because now we can create URLs for our portals. And so we can go back here. So now what is left is for us to add portals inside our 360 scenes. And we kind of already saw how to add portals. But here I'll try to show you a specific way of adding portals so that you kind of add portals that make a bit of sense inside a 360 scene. And so they are kind of a bit more complex in terms of structure, but they make a bit more sense inside a 360 scene. So let me first try to show you how it looks. So I'm opening the final example here. And so what we want to do is to create these kind of things, which are kind of typical in these virtual tours. So we often have kind of arrows laying on the floor so that we can kind of activate the arrows to jump ahead. And this is actually a portal, but it just has kind of a different visual aspect. So now I can click on this portal and I go outside. And here there's another portal. And in this case, I've placed a different visual representation, because usually the arrows mean that you are going to move in that direction, but you are not going to jump to the position where the arrow is, because in the previous scene, the arrow was kind of going through the door. So you're not going to stop at the door, you're going through the door. But in some cases, you have portals that mean you are going to jump to that location. And so they are usually they have kind of a different visual aspect. In this case, the aspect is simpler. The visual feedback is simply a circle on the floor. So this means when I click here, I will jump to that point on the floor, and this is it. So I jumped to that white point on the floor. So now we have portals that allow us to jump between our 360 scenes. And if we want, we can go back to the room. So how can we add these portals? I'm just going to show you one way to make it a bit easier, at least in my perspective, a bit easier to place them. Okay, so this probably feels a complicated way of doing this, but in my experience, it kind of simplifies things. So this is the kind of the complete scene for, in this case, for the classroom. So we have our outer entity that represents the complete internal scene. We have our sky with a 360 photo. And now we want to add a portal. And for the portal, I find it easier to, again, create an outer entity that represents the portal. And I usually assign a class, a specific class. In this case, I call it hotspot heading. So this is just something that I came up with, just a name to make it easier to identify then in the visual inspector. And then we will need to rotate this portal to make sure that from the perspective of the user that it makes sense. So to make it easier, we create this, we rotate the outer entity. And basically this rotation here, I'm going to try to show it in a minute, but this rotation of this outer entity, this basically allows you to position the hotspot on the correct heading. So just on the correct orientation towards the user. I think it's when I demonstrate this in the inspector, I think this may become a bit clearer, I hope. And then inside this outer entity, then we place our portal. And again, just to remind you, because these portals, they have their own, they are not the default portals. We want to use our own images, so we need to add this link visual aspect enabled false, and then we just to use an image. But because the image, let me try to show you the image of, I'm going to open the source code so that things become a bit more concrete. I'm just going to show you the image of the arrow. So the arrow that represents the portal is this, but we don't want the arrow to appear facing up. So we need to kind of rotate the arrow a bit to make it look like it's horizontal on the floor, or at least near the floor, or floating at kind of mid-height. But we want to rotate it a bit to make it point towards something. And so to do that, let me go back. To rotate this image, we apply a rotation here on the link. So this rotation here is mainly to orient the arrow itself on the correct, for it to point on the correct direction. So notice that the rotation is only on, in this case, on the y-axis. So just to make sure that it points correctly. And so let me find myself. Okay. Okay, let me show let me try to show this here in the Visual Inspector to try to make it things a bit clearer, I hope. So I'm focusing on the hotspots. Let me rotate a bit here, and I'm going to open here the hotspot. And so this rotation that we have here on this hotspot, and let me maybe try to zoom out a bit. So the rotation that we have on the outer entity, it just, uh, let me try to, okay. It just allows you to kind of set the correct heading for the arrow, okay? And because in this case, we want the arrow to face the door. So this is the main purpose of the rotation on the outer entity. Then we have the rotation on the link itself, and this is used kind of put the arrow in the correct perspective so that it kind of looks like it's more horizontal, you know. So we do this in kind of two steps, because the most important one is the heading, whether the when the user is facing a given direction, if the hotspot appears there, and then the other is how the hotspot appears, whether it appears rotated in one way or the other. So if we separate these things, it becomes easier to control. And so that is why I have kind of this structure here for the portals. One thing that you can use to make it easier to get the rotation of this outer entity, although this is not mandatory, is kind of to combine the web-centric component with another one, stats. And this stats component, it gives you this panel here with statistics about how the scene is running. When you combine the two, the web-centric adds a bit of information here that shows the camera rotation, so that you can just enter your scene, rotate where you want your portal to appear, and then just copy these values, these rotation values, back to here. So it's an alternative to using the Visual Inspector, because the Visual Inspector does not put yourself automatically in the position of the camera, and so using that technique may be a bit easier. And then you just have to rotate the portal image itself. And at the end, you just remove the stats component so that this panel does not appear to the final user. And so the final tour is this one, which I have already shown. And basically this is it. So this will allow you to create environments with several 360 photos on the same file. So you don't wait when you jump from one scene to the other. It's instant, as you can see here. So we immediately go there. And so that things are kind of well structured in your HTML code. And so this finishes this chapter. And I know this was a lot, so I understand that you'll need to go through this again. And what I suggested is that you do this right now, so that you go back to the portals and kind of try to go with this step by step. And for the portals, I suggest that you do these two exercises just to practice. For the 360s chapter, there are no exercises on purpose, because what I suggest that you do is that you already try, that you kind of use your own project to practice this. Because you will have to create the first part of your project to deliver in a few days. And so you kind of can use it as a way to exercise creating this kind of environments. And if you don't have the final photos for now, don't worry, just use some 360 photos from, for example, from these examples, and then you can just replace the images, which is easy to do. Okay, so for the next, let me just